The vast expanse of Nevada's Badlands stretches endlessly to the horizon. Hidden within these mountain strongholds are some of America's deepest and darkest secrets. Secret aircraft and the other legends of Area 51. Among these sandstone canyons today, there's a new glimmer of truth. Shrouded in mystery, it's a story that demands to be told. These are the witnesses of one of America's most unusual UFO encounters in history. Navy veterans and a band of brothers that want you to know that what they witnessed is real. This is their story. Petty Officer Jason Turner served aboard the USS Princeton in 2004. His personal conviction for democracy and patriotism guides him in his search for the truth.
This is an actual event that happened, and I witnessed it.
Aviation tech Patrick Hughes, a USS Nimitz veteran, he speaks for his shipmates who choose to remain silent.
I'm one of those who has to see to believe, and obviously I've seen the evidence of this, so it exists.
Top Gun Air Intercept Controller Kevin Day and Fire Controlman Gary Voorhees, both from the Princeton, served together in the ship's Combat Information Center. They saw them first, whatever it is they are.
They wanted to show themselves, whatever they were. I don't think they wanted anything really to do with us.
They were literally breaking the laws of physics in my eyes.
These sailors are here for truth and vindication, and their story goes back over a decade to a time and place that marked a departure for all of them, both in their Navy careers, but also in their knowledge of the limits of man's technological understanding of our world. Looking out over the ocean toward the horizon, sun, sea, and sky form an endless vista, a never-ending cycle of tide, wind, and waves. Here, far from shore, strange events have unfolded. These stories stretch the boundaries of our imagination and challenge our beliefs. This is a true story of such events from the accounts of the sailors and naval aviators who experienced them. Professional military service members who want the world to know that what they encountered is real. Even more troubling, our military has no explanation. The answers seem to elude everyone, like reflections on the waves, yet they are out there. November 10th, 2004. 90 miles southwest of San Diego, California. In the Naval Operations Area, the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group and her complement of warships and the aircraft of Air Wing 11 are conducting a routine 2-week training exercise. Nearby, the guided missile cruiser USS Princeton has been tracking unknown aircraft that appear and disappear from her sophisticated Aegis radar screens. The Spy 1 Bravo radar is one of the most advanced sensors ever deployed. Princeton's main role is air defense of the strike group, and Operations Specialist Senior Chief Day is in charge of protecting the airspace around the Nimitz.
My job was to man the radars and ID everything that flew in the skies. And I also sat a position called Anti-Air Warfare Coordinator, where if we ever had to go to war, I was the guy that was going to launch the missiles. In addition to that, I was the Air Intercept Controller. When the Super Hornets take off the carrier, I'm the guy that takes control and takes them to the fight and gets them home safe. There was a lot of experience in that room. The captain had 28 years, I had 18 years. And the Aegis ship is our newest weapons system afloat. It's got the Spy 1 radar system, the phased array radar system, and I was an expert on that.
Inside the Combat Information Center, Chief Day's attention is focused on a group of unknown aircraft on the Spy 1 screen. He's trying to identify them.
I was on watch, and we were probably 100 miles, I forget how far exactly that day we were, off the coast of San Diego southwest, kind of off the coast of Mexico, Baja. And I started to notice these weird tracks that were popping onto my radar coverage right about on San Clemente Island. And the reason why I say they were weird, because they were appearing in groups of 5 to 10 at a time, and they were pretty closely spaced to each other, and they were 28,000 feet going 100 knots tracking south. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, you know, that's kind of odd. I mean, I don't know anything that flies like that. They weren't on the comm air routes, the commercial airline routes. I wasn't really that concerned about them. I didn't consider them hostile for any reason at all. Another watch or two, as I'm watching, the same formation appeared again. And over the course of 3-4 days, it probably counted up to that point, groups of 5 to 10 at a time. There were probably 50, 60 tracks by then.
Today, Kevin and Gary are still looking for answers. They've known each other for over a decade since their Navy days. Gary was a third-class petty officer and fire controlman back then.
I worked on the Aegis computer system on a CG-59 guided missile cruiser, the USS Princeton. I'm in charge of CEC and data recording and maintaining and operating all the mainframes that run the system.
They're both becoming increasingly frustrated in their attempts to ID the strange aerial objects, which have no transponders and fit no known flight profiles.
The guys that work on the Spy 1 Bravo radar, they had come across and said they needed the system down for recalibration because they were getting clutter or ghost tracks, and they needed to recalibrate to get rid of them. And once they did finish all that recalibration, bring it back up, the tracks didn't disappear. They were still there, but they were actually sharper and clearer.
They were doing diagnostic tests on everything we had to make sure it was not a system malfunction. And it turned out that it wasn't. These were actually real objects. I had the highest spy track quality possible on these contacts.
In this situation, I actually started recording on all 4 tapes at the same time. That way, it was a one continuous loop, and I was just replacing them as they were, becoming full.
We failed utterly to identify these things. It didn't meet any of the parameters for anything that was known.
In some cases, they seem to descend from space and then suddenly plunge to near sea level in seconds. Coupled with the unidentified nature of the craft and lack of clearance, these extreme flight observations are very troubling to the crew assigned to protect the carrier group from aerial threats. Sunday, November 14th, morning. The Nimitz deck crew is busy launching FA-18F Super Hornets, helicopters, and E-2 Hawkeye early warning planes. The mission? Simulated air defense, or ADEX training over the Pacific. The winds are calm, the skies are clear, a near perfect day for flying. As they launch, the Black Aces squadron has no knowledge of events happening nearby.
In the back of my mind, that's when I determined I was going to become concerned about these objects, is we were getting ready to launch a whole bunch of aircraft in that same piece of sky.
Fast Eagle climbs out to 20,000 feet and heads to the cap station about 40 miles south of the carrier. The cap is a rendezvous point used to form up with the other airplanes.
Just 25 miles separation.
The commander of Fast Eagle has over a decade in the air wing. His wingman for the day is a new pilot, a young officer on her first carrier deployment. She's paired with a senior pilot, her backseat weapons system officer for the mission. He will manage navigation and the advanced radar and targeting pods on the aircraft. Overhead, an E-2 Hawkeye from the Wallbanger Squadron is on station directing the aircraft. Banger provides eye-in-the-sky command and control during carrier flight operations. Back in the Combat Information Center on Princeton, the mysterious objects are back. And today is the first time Senior Chief Day has jets in the air that can intercept the mysterious aircraft.
Seeing these contacts, Captain Smith orders me to intercept one of them. So I went back to the console. I picked the closest one that was to us, and I had intended to let the Hawkeye do the intercept because they already had control. It was just easier.
Day briefs the captain, and they agree to send the Hornets. The air intercept controller aboard Princeton, called sign Charlie, radios the Hawkeye and takes control of Fast Eagle.
Banger, Charlie. Charlie, this is Banger, go ahead. Banger, Charlie. Do you hold unknown air contact, blah, 270-48, 28,000 feet, bogey. Charlie, Banger, negative. Radar picture's clean.
The E-2 radar operators have been frustrated in their attempts to get a radar return on the unknown aerial target that Princeton is tracking. Even with their 24-foot radar dish, they can't get a lock on the object.
Banger, Charlie. Transfer Fast Eagle flight to Charlie Control, button 13. We have a real-world tasking for them, over. Charlie, Banger, roger. Fast Eagle, Charlie, stand by for real-world tasking.
Charlie, Fast Eagle, send it.
We vector towards that position in the sky, and real quiet on the radio. I'm just giving them BRA calls, which is bearing range altitude, to these unknown bogey group. And basically, I'm just telling their crew where the object is, the bearing from them, and the range from them, and the altitude, so they can drive towards it.
Contact BRA 270-41, 20,000 feet, bogey, snap, 270, over.
Roger, pin bearing 270, 41 miles. 100, go trail.
100.
Say state.
State 12,000 pounds. Clean, do you have it?
I'm trying to get a track on it now. They sent link 16, but my radar picture is clean.
The next radio call takes everyone by surprise.
Fast Eagle 110, stay loadout. 110, what's your weapons loadout?
Yeah, the tactical action officer, the TAO, jumps on the radio. Her name was Lieutenant Elders, and she just point blank asked the Fast Eagle flight if they were carrying any type of weapons. And there was a stunned pause on the radio.
Wings clean, Princeton. We just have CAT-M training missiles, and they're not coming off the rail.
We're in an exercise environment, and the last thing we wanted to do is start shooting stuff.
Now the controllers have the pilot's undivided attention. Normally, the squadron doesn't carry live ordnance when training.
What do you guys think that was about?
What, about the loadout? I have no idea. Maybe it's drug runners or something. Yeah, it could be. Or a lost Cessna out of SoCal.
I don't like this.
Fast Eagle, Charlie, contact BRA 160-34, 8,000 feet, bogey.
Roger, 34 miles at 8,000. Committed, your call, continuing.
As Fast Eagle approaches the target, they see nothing unusual. Their onboard radars can't get a lock on the object.
Fast Eagle, Charlie, BRA 160-10, 8,000 feet.
Roger.
Fast Eagle, Charlie, merge plot.
What the merge plot means on the radar, you got two objects in the same vertical piece of sky, so when I'm looking at the 2D display, it looks like a one radar blob now.
First, the operator clear stationary. I had it at 17.7. Showing, you get basically no airspeed on it.
Hey, you guys seeing this? What is that?
As the Super Hornets approach the target, they see a disturbance on the ocean's surface. It's about the size of a 737, and it looks like something could be just below the surface.
100, anchor here, Eagles 24.
Roger.
Charlie, Fast Eagle. We're observing something in the water here, possibly aircraft in the water at the merge plot, just north of our position, about 2 miles.
Charlie, roger.
I'm descending to Angels 14 to take a look.
Do you think that's our unknown?
Man, not sure. Radar's clean.
As soon as he got to the merge plot position, the object that he was intercepting dropped from 28,000 feet down to 50 feet above the water in 0.78 seconds, as I found out later the next day.
As the Super Hornets get closer to the ocean disturbance, he suddenly spots another craft above it. A much smaller white object with an oblong shape, hovering, then darting just above the waves. The object is moving around erratically, seemingly focused on the white water. The shape is similar to a tic-tac. It's smooth like porcelain. It's not an airplane. Suddenly, the object begins to rise into the air.
Hey, this thing just turned on my nose. It's coming up. 2 miles.
The strange craft begins mirroring the turn rate of Fast Eagle.
Charlie 1 bogey, 287 at 2 miles, Angels 5.
The object is now at his 3 o'clock position as he continues to turn with it.
He's turning hard at 3,000 meters.
We had the external communications in the speaker in combat so everyone could listen to it. And the next thing I hear on the radio going, oh my God, I'm engaged.
1,000 meters, he's southwest, Angels 8.
The commander is now about a mile away as he maneuvers his Hornet to get behind the unknown craft. It's about the size of an F-18, about 47 feet long, and it has no wings. As the dogfight unfolds, he quickly turns and dives to bring his jet's nose ahead of the object to close the distance.
Holy f***. It jumped. 1,000 meters, he's... I lost him. Dude, you see it?
Suddenly, the tic-tac rockets past. It's gone beyond the horizon in the blink of an eye.
I saw it go 137. No tally.
That didn't just happen.
Say again. Fast Eagle Charlie, sir, you're not going to believe this, but the bogey group is now back anchored cap station, over.
As Fast Eagle returns to the area of the ocean disturbance, the object is gone, and the sea is once again calm. Soon, they land on the ship. Back on board Banger, the flight crew has been listening to the radio transmissions from Fast Eagle. The crew has been tracking the intercepts on their advanced display systems called the CEC. One of the radar operators, who wishes to remain anonymous, describes hearing the fear in the pilots' voices, and he knows this is no drill.
I had a good friend who flew on the Hawkeyes. We've been calling him Roger to protect his identity because he didn't want to come forward at this time, but he wanted to contribute to the story to verify that it actually happened. There were 5 people in the airplane. Roger would have been sitting in the radar officer seat, which is towards the back middle of the plane. The side of each one of them, or behind them, depending how the chair's rotating, is a window.
Suddenly, his attention is drawn to something outside the Hawkeye. He and the entire crew watch in disbelief as a tic-tac object suddenly forms up on their E2 and then just as quickly shoots away from sight. The crew is left in disbelief. As Banger returns to the ship, the crew is shaken. The highly unusual events are troubling, but what happens next has haunted them to this day. U.S. Navy officers quickly arrive and escort the aircrew to a secure space on the ship. As the crewmen begin to take off their flight gear, an officer begins the debriefing by telling them this event did not happen, and they are given non-disclosure agreements to sign. They're warned to never discuss this event again.
Again, we're preparing for the air defense exercise. Now we got all the squadrons launching off the carrier because they're all up going to do their functional check flights.
Senior Chief Day watched in disbelief as the tic-tac UFOs reacted to the incoming fighter jets.
All the objects in the sky, they all dropped out of the sky from 28,000 feet down to 50 feet.
Based on the Spy 1 Bravo radar system, the object descended at over 24,000 miles an hour.
It was unbelievable because normally what would happen if a normal aircraft did that, first of all, it would fly apart. It wouldn't be able to withstand the G-forces, and there would be multiple sonic booms. It would be boom, 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 and this did not make any sonic booms.
From what I observed, I saw that it went from, right around between 25 and 30,000 feet down to sea level. Sometimes they'd be going slower than an object should, to stay in the air, and sometimes they would be moving faster than an object should from a standstill. So, going high altitudes to low altitudes very quickly, just staying immobile.
In my mind, I was thinking, good God, it's raining UFOs. Because that's what it looked like. They're going choo, 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 choo. It was quite amazing.
Tag number 04.
A USS Princeton senior sonar operator has come forward to say the ship did not have any unidentified sonar contacts during the encounters. The towed sonar array was not in use at the time. The USS Louisville, a Los Angeles-class nuclear fast attack submarine, was also patrolling the area. The former captain of the sub reported they had no unknown sonar contacts during the events of that week, despite the observations by the pilots. After the intercepts, both Kevin and Gary climbed up to the ship's bridge wing to get a better view of the objects through the binoculars.
Yeah, we'd go up to the bridge wing and look at them through the big eyes, which is heavily magnified binoculars that are out on the bridge wing of the ship.
Here's my opportunity, and we intercepted a UFO, I think. Even when I was off watch, I was usually up in combat anyway, and I was sitting at the console. I just picked the closest object to us, and I got the relative bearing from the ship, slave over to the relative bearing at about the right altitude, and saw this white light in the sky.
The movements were smooth to erratic. They just moved from one point to another. It was always a very sharp and clean movement. It always felt like a constant speed, not like speeding up. Just it needed to go to that point, and it decided to do it at this speed. And then it would just go from nothing to the speed they were going to go, and then stop at the next point.
Meanwhile, back on the Nimitz, aviation tech Patrick Hughes is working to secure the classified data recorders from the Hawkeye that encountered the tic-tac.
We pull out their hard drives. We call them RMCs, we call them bricks because they physically heavy like a brick. They contain the software to run the airplane, and they also record a lot of the data that the aircrew sees during the flight. So we take the removable stuff, we take it out, we go downstairs, back to our shop.
Patrick's job involves tracking the chain of custody of the hard drives.
We open up the safe, put them in the safe. We've got tracking sheets so we know what RMCs are on what airplane. We know who signed them out, who put them in the airplane, who took them out of the airplane.
As he gets ready to wrap up the mission, there's a knock on the door.
Our commanding officer's there, two other guys in flight suits who I'm assuming were Air Force officers, because pretty sure that's the insignia they had on, but they were not on the ship earlier. I did not see them come on the ship, so I'm not sure how they got there. But the skipper basically said, I need the bricks off the flight. We opened the safe, we put them in the bags. He took them, he took his two anonymous officers and left.
The officers, with the classified hard drives in hand, soon board an HS-60 Seahawk helicopter and leave Nimitz. Soon thereafter, Petty Officer Voorhees has his own visit by unknown officials on the Princeton.
Once they landed and everybody got off, then about maybe 20 minutes later, I got called in to have all my data recording tapes turned over. And then also told that I needed to reload CEC because it had been wiped. So it was, so I turned over all the tapes, and then they also said if there's any even blank tapes to erase anything else that's in the shop. Well, they were plainclothes people that came aboard on the helicopter. It was my chain of command that took control of the tapes from me. The helo left with them after that, so because we went right back to flight ops.
The link between the tic-tacs and these men is unknown. How they became aware of the UFO encounters and how they arrived so quickly on board after the event is also a mystery. The video you are now watching is the actual gun camera FLIR footage of the tic-tac taken by a later flight. This is the first video ever released by the U.S. government showing military planes engaging UFOs. The advanced targeting pod, known as FLIR, works in both TV mode and infrared mode. The film reveals no control surfaces, no exhaust plume, a uniform heat signature, and no visible means of propulsion. Gary and his shipmates saw the FLIR film on their consoles and on the secret LAN aboard the Princeton.
It was a much clearer video. You could see the shape of the ship. You could see it, moving. I tried to go and get a disc to come make a copy of it, and by the time I got back, it was already off of our hard drive, off the secret LAN. Yeah, no access to it whatsoever.
Petty Officer Jason Turner also saw a much higher resolution version of the FLIR film showing strange appendages extending from the object.
It did have some protruding at the bottom of it. I couldn't tell if they were curled back or straight down.
Jason says the video was approximately 10 minutes in length and much longer than the video that has been released.
I saw this video playing and I'd ask him, is this what we're training, or what's part of this training that we're going through? And he said, no, this is real life. And when I saw it, it was a very clear image, a very clear video, and this thing was going berserk, like making turns, like it's incredible. The amount of G-forces that it would put on a human that this thing was doing. The jets were like trying to trail this thing, and it would just run off and leave them. It would just gone, and then it would come back, and then you would see it, and then it made a maneuver, like they were chasing it straight on. It was going with them. This thing stopped, turned, and just gone. I mean, that's the only way to describe what it looked like.
Hey, that is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My God.
Just 11 years later, fighter jets from USS Roosevelt filmed this anomalous object in 2015.
Well, if there's anything, it's rotating.
Like the Nimitz encounter, they too were conducting routine training when fleets of UFOs were encountered by the pilots. The Nimitz encounters remained cloaked secrecy for over 13 years. The first-hand testimony about UFO sightings is practically unheard of from military service members. Thanks to the brave and honest accounts of the sailors and naval aviators who have come forward to relate their experiences, and of the remarkable videos they filmed that day, the silence has been broken.
I dealt with this all on my own for many, many years, and it was not a very pleasant journey to go through, because no one really believes you. But now things have changed, and anyone out there that's struggling with this and wants to reach out, there is now a group that you can reach out to and get help and support and vindication.
It's honestly been a little relieving to be able to actually talk about it and how important that event really was, and not just keep blowing it off. There's people out here that really need to know and want to know, and You have the support of me and Kevin and my other shipmates that have come forward and decided to talk about it.
My role is to describe the story and convince people that yes, this event really happened and these objects were really real, but what they are, I have no idea.
It is something. I want to know what it is. That's the whole reason I chose to come forward to contribute to the story, because there is a story here, there is more information here. The more of us that talk about it, the better chance of the full story coming together.
And it's vindication for us that other people are looking into it, and we finally tell our story and people listen.
As we strive to understand these encounters and come to terms with what they mean, there's something far beyond the horizon and the limits of our comprehension waiting for all of us.
On the cusp of the new millennium, an eerie anxiety permeates our culture regarding the possibility of extraterrestrial life. Surveys show that 1/3 of all Americans believe in UFOs. Nearly 5 million claim they have encountered alien beings. Scientists remind us that these fantastic sightings are unconfirmed and unconfirmable. Skeptics insist that the people who make these claims are either deluded or they're exploiting the controversy for personal gain. And yet, the people who say they've had these experiences remain loyal to their stories. Stories which capture our attention and reflect a deep hunger to believe that we are not alone. In rural Kentucky, a man recalls his family's supposed shotgun battle with aliens in 1955. A UFO investigator describes what she believes to be a face-to-face encounter with an alien. Just a mile from New York City, dozens of people hold the stories of UFOs and extraterrestrial visitations in a public park. And finally, a biblical scholar explains his belief that 6,000 years ago, all of human civilization was influenced by visitors from outer space. The notion of extraterrestrial life, fact or fiction? Or can it only be described as unexplained? In 1955, Kelly, Kentucky, 70 miles north of Nashville, Tennessee, was a peaceful farming community. On the evening of August 21st, deep in the Kelly countryside, a party of 10 people reported a wild encounter with aliens. The Langfords were winding down from a family get-together filled with laughter and card playing. 12 years old at the time, Lonnie Langford says he remembers that night clearly.
There was me, my brother, my sister, 2 half-brothers, their wives, and a friend and his wife. That's about it, besides my mother. And we just sat around, and talked and played cards. My half-brother's friend, Taylor, he had to go out. We didn't have no inside restrooms back then. And as he was going out the door, He looked up and he noticed this round object had lights all around it.
The Langfords' guest raced inside to tell the others what he had seen. They all thought he was joking. The card playing went on, uninterrupted. Finally, everyone turned in for the night, everyone except Lonnie's mother.
She was just laying there awake with her eyes open and looking out the living room window, and saw this this object standing there. She screamed, you know.
Everyone jumped out of bed, and Lonnie's brothers grabbed their shotguns.
He saw little creatures 3 foot tall, webbed feet, webbed ears, big eyes, hands that were web shaped like. They were silver, had silver uniforms, no noise, no sound, no talking. They was just there. I don't know why.
Lonnie and his family watched the creatures float through the air as his brothers fired their shotguns. They say some bullets knocked the aliens over, but that to everyone's horror, the strange beings got back up again, unscathed.
Everybody got roused up, started hollering and screaming.
Lonnie's brother headed outside with his shotgun.
Just as he was going outside, one of them grabbed him by the hair of the head, and then he jumped on out in the yard and, shot at him.
Lonnie Langford said he and his family watched in terror as these glowing beings circled their home. When his brothers finally ran out of ammunition, they brandished their flashlights. The beams illuminated the sky, and to the family's surprise, the silver creatures quickly retreated into the darkness.
They wasn't trying to hurt nobody. They wasn't trying to hurt us all. I think they was more scared of us than we were of them. But I was really scared. I'm just telling you the truth.
Is Lonnie Langford telling the truth? Or is his story nothing more than a twisted memory from a family gathering gone awry? What we do know is that on the same evening, other residents in the area had reported what they believed to be meteor sightings, accompanied by a strange, machine-like hum. When the Langfords reported their sighting, police officers, state troopers, and even soldiers from the nearby Fort Campbell Army Base arrived to check it out. Kentucky State Trooper Russell Ferguson investigated the incident. He found no physical evidence to substantiate the Langford story.
The only thing that we did find was the family there, rather disturbed, very emotional, and swearing that something had occurred in the way of small, silver-looking people with big eyes and big heads trying to get into their house.
UFO investigator Philip Imbrogno finds the Langford family's story compelling. He thinks they may indeed have encountered extraterrestrials.
It is one of the cases that is actually very convincing, because here you have a family that really didn't care anything about UFOs, and all of a sudden they report that they had these little beings coming on their property and they fired on them and so on. And to this day, that is one of the cases that convinced me that perhaps we should consider that there are extraterrestrials here from time to time that have landed on our planet and interacted with our society.
During the time of the Langford sighting in the mid-50s, Americans of all walks of life were enthralled with space-age images, and a new wave of science fiction movies was coming out of Hollywood, many of which were based on the growing anxieties surrounding the Cold War.
The local people were influenced by movies and books and magazine articles popular in that particular time, but keep in mind that the people of this area were fundamentally agricultural in background and Protestant in their faith, with some commitment to the fundamental side of faith.
Since the Langfords claimed to be devout Christians, is it possible that they had become overzealous from a religious revival meeting that Sunday afternoon? State Trooper Russell Ferguson doesn't think so. He believes they were drunk.
I didn't find anything up there except just a bunch of people running amok. They had one specific emotion, and that's from, I think, a pretty wild day.
Oh, there was no alcohol there. No alcohol at all, because my mom, she was real Christian and she wouldn't allow it in the house. My brothers did drink, you know, but they didn't have anything around the house. There wasn't no alcohol around the house that night.
Another explanation for what took place that night involves a traveling circus which happened to be passing through town.
I went to our newspaper files and found the showing of the Shrine Circus here at our fairgrounds for 3 nights, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, prior to this activity at Kelly. It's certainly possible that monkeys were in that traveling troupe of the Shrine Circus, and it is possible that some of them could have escaped.
Some people said it was monkeys from a circus. I didn't know that there was a circus at the time, and neither did my family. There ain't no silver monkeys. How can a monkey be silver?
If these strange visions weren't brought on by excessive drinking or playful chimpanzees, what really happened? One author on paranormal phenomena, Greg Little, thinks there could be a scientific explanation. This part of Kentucky lies on a major fault line. Little points out that tectonic pressures in the Earth can create unusual forms of electromagnetic discharge, strong enough to disorient people.
These electromagnetic plasmas have this enormous, powerful electromagnetic field around them. And when a person gets close to this field, it does interact with brain biochemistry. It also produces serotonin, a substance that is biochemically identical to a hallucinogenic drug called dimethyltryptamine, which is a 30-minute LSD trip, which, gee, if you had a 30-minute LSD trip when you were asleep, what would we call that? A dream.
Dreams, nightmares, few, if any, will ever be sure of exactly what happened that summer night in 1955.
I have no idea why the aliens visit me. Maybe they're just passing over and something, got curious and wanted to come down. I don't have no idea. Why do you think God put all those other planets out there and all those moons and all those other suns and just left this one with life on it? All the rest of them out there is without life now.
I ask you, if you were suddenly capable of going from here to Mars or the sun or whatever other planet, and you were coming to Earth with all that technology that was available to you. Now, surely to hell you wouldn't land in Kelly, Kentucky, when we've got the nation's capital and all the other big cities and what have you. No, I don't think so.
One thing is certain. Lonnie Langford and his family did not go out seeking extraterrestrials that August evening, and the memory has haunted them ever since. There are areas around the world which are known as so-called UFO hotspots because of the frequency of reported sightings. Pine Bush in upstate New York is one of those places. That is what attracted UFO investigator Ellen Crystal. This is where she actively attempts to initiate contact with aliens. Having written a book on her experiences called Silent Invasion, she believes her 20 years of research, including over 1,000 photographs, offers evidence of the existence of extraterrestrial life.
It really takes a certain mentality to do it in a cohesive way so that you come away with some research. I mean, there's people like me trying to collect research and successfully doing it and trying to have close encounters where you can use equipment and machinery that actually works and registers.
Ellen first began searching for extraterrestrials in the countryside around Pine Bush during the early 1980s. At that time, a psychic told her that she had been cured by aliens during a severe childhood illness.
She basically did a reading with me, and she said, when you were 4, you were really sick, and she said, I see the ship above a White House, and they healed you. And I said, well, I was sick. I was sick for 8 months. I thought I was 2.
This psychic reading motivated Ellen to pursue her dream of meeting up with aliens. This is her story. She maintains that on August 7th, 1980, she had a close encounter which satisfied her curiosity, perhaps more fully than she had expected.
My own stipulation was that I would not walk in a new field that I hadn't walked in already. So I had gone up to actually the first site, which is right up here, about half a mile, and I was standing in the field, and I was turning around, just watching some nebulous lights. I saw a huge bright light go down in the trees right across the street from me. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I kind of thought they were daring me.
Ellen took the challenge. She drove from field to field, contemplating her next move. Gathering up her courage, she went back to the spot where she had first seen the mysterious lights. She says that as she aimed her flashlight up into the trees, she saw something that looked like a moth. But when she moved the light down, she saw legs. Legs that appeared to run in place.
But the thing ran across the clearing when it could have ducked into any bush. This was the other thing that puzzled me. It ran across the clearing, came to the edge of the clearing, stopped and stared at me. The alien in pine bush was about 3.5 feet tall. No discernible clothing, beige, very pale beige looking, very thin, large head, no hair, very big yellow eyes that wrapped around to the side, and the eyes were what caught in my flashlight.
Ellen was bewildered by an overwhelming power, which she sensed radiating from the creature.
I mean, they look, if you just look at somebody that size, you think nothing, like a child. But then you get this awesome feeling of power. And at that point, I probably decided to take off. That was probably one of the deciding factors.
Frightened and exhausted, she drove to a deserted parking lot to rest and collect her thoughts.
I just couldn't deal with all the emotion. I was so paralyzed with fear, and I remember my chest like going up and down. I mean, I was totally panic-stricken. I started to sweat.
Ellen Crystal kept a journal of this and other experiences that she included in her book. As part of her research, she has developed elaborate theories, all her own, about why these aliens have come to Earth.
I think that the aliens have a problem. I think they have a really terminal physical problem. I think the only reason that aliens would be coming here on such a massive level would be if they have a terminal physical problem, and that essentially equates to reproduction, that they may be a race on the edge of extinction.
Are Ellen Crystal's claims of extraterrestrial incursions into upstate New York to be believed? Or is she subscribing to a type of modern-day mythology? Professor of Sociology at Northwestern University, Bernard Beck, thinks this is the case.
There are some people who are saying, when the extraterrestrials come, they are so smart and so accomplished, just by virtue of the fact that they got here, that they'll bring with them all sorts of things to make our lives better. They'll take care of us. And like anything that is created by ordinary people in their masses, through culture, through talking over back fences and talking over lunch and talking over a beer at a bar, it creates a culture, expectations, and a sense of the way these things are supposed to go.
According to fellow UFO investigator Philip Imbrogno, Ellen's expectations are so intense that, combined with her apparent fascination with science fiction, her objectivity is severely compromised.
I believe that Ellen Crystal is very sincere about what she's doing. I question some of her methods of investigation and some of her conclusions as to what she is collecting. When she looks at her evidence, she says this can be nothing else but ETs. Okay? When I look at her evidence, I say, well, you've got something here. There are a lot of unexplainable sightings, but I don't think she has enough evidence to actually put a label on it to say this is an extraterrestrial spaceship.
Many of the UFO sightings in Hudson Valley occur around the Stewart International Airport near Pine Bush. Airport manager and retired air traffic controller Ken No is familiar with these claims.
People can see meteors, which are pretty spectacular sights sometimes. Most of the sightings that I've heard of are in the evening, And various airplanes have different kinds of lights, different configurations of lights. And if people aren't looking at the night sky all the time, or a great deal of the time, they may find something unusual looking.
Adding to the confusion, in the summer of 1988, during a rash of reported UFO sightings, a group of pilots decided to play a practical joke on the residents of the Hudson Valley.
They flew in an echelon formation, or if you like, a V formation, in small light aircraft, which don't make a great deal of noise, and they looked pretty impressive. And so it was quite an impressive sight. And a number of people reported that as a UFO, which probably was the pilot's intention in the first place, to have some fun with folks. It caused quite a stir for a number of years.
Ken Noe and other local air traffic controllers remain skeptical of Ellen Crystal's conclusions and of her UFO video research.
I have seen some of her work, some of her photographs, and I think they're certainly questionable.
These tapes were shot near the Stewart International Airport.
Clearly looks like an airplane to me. I see flashing strobe lights as anti-collision lights, and what may be two landing lights on the wingtips of the aircraft. Again, this clearly looks to me like a slightly out of focus video of an aircraft. I think you can clearly see that this is probably a large jet aircraft. At this point on the tape, you can even hear the engines. Looks like an airplane to me.
Ellen's photographs fail to hold up under any scientific scrutiny. Another problem is that her reported sightings tend to take place when she is alone. Psychology professor Hubert Dolezal says that when Ellen's psychic told her that aliens had cured her during a childhood illness, it may have caused these delusional sightings.
I'm sure people talked. The family probably mourned, cried. She was probably told she might die, or chances are she perceived that and picked up on it. And then she's told that someone out of the ordinary, someone out of the medical community is responsible for her healing. Perhaps the most important event in her life. She has life. Psychologically, I liken this with someone who finds out somewhat late in life that he or she was adopted, and the terrific human need to make contact.
Many UFO sightings are easily explained. Yet when more than one person claims to see the same object at the same time from different vantage points, the reports become harder to dismiss. Hudson County, New Jersey, the town of North Bergen, a middle-class suburb across the river from New York City. Its residents are hard-working, educated professionals who tend to be realists. This is also a place where there have been persistent claims of alien and UFO sightings. George Obarski owned a Manhattan liquor store and drove the same route back to his home in North Bergen, New Jersey, every night for decades. At 3 a.m. on the morning of January 12, 1975.
It was a big thing. Yeah. And it seemed to be, I would say, maybe 6 feet high. You know, like a pancake. Yeah. It was blown up and like a pancake. Right. And the thing landed right ahead of me.
He described small figures who got out. He said they looked like kids in snowsuits. And they were each one carrying a kind of a squarish receptacle and a long spoon-like shovel. They dug soil samples extremely quickly, spooning up the dirt, put it in the little satchels, and got back in the craft. He said they moved incredibly fast, like kids coming down a fire escape. And the thing took off. He was absolutely terrified, stunned. He didn't know what he was seeing.
Even after George Obarski made it home, he was still shaken, terrorized by what he had encountered.
I was scared to death. Yeah. You know, I was sweating, and I immediately made some tea. Boy, after that, I turned on this radio and took 2 aspirins. You know, I was scared. Right. Man, just either I'm going crazy or something awful wrong.
George Obarski died in 1990. His son, Frank, remembers his father's story well.
What he described was a big saucer-like object, which, for want of any better explanation, you'd have to call a UFO, unidentified flying object, that came down, was sort of disc-like on the bottom, had very strange lighting, sort of glowed. The clincher was, after it landed, my father described himself as being basically frozen, almost in fear. And this is a guy who'd been robbed a lot in the liquor store in New York and knew what fear was like and had coped with it a lot. But he said he was genuinely frightened of this thing.
Bud Hopkins tried to corroborate George Obarski's story with other witnesses, including a doorman who worked at the Stonehenge apartment building across the street from the park.
I realized it was a big apartment building there, so I spent weeks trying to locate the doorman. I called him, and I remember the adrenaline rushing when this man said, "I will never forget it, this flying saucer came down and landed in the park," and I watched the thing come down. Then he started describing what it looked like, and it was an identical description to George.
After writing about Obarski's story in the Village Voice newspaper, Bud Hopkins kept looking for other possible witnesses.
One family came to light afterwards. They were living about 5 blocks away, seeing this object coming down the street, maybe 40 feet up, slanted, and they described it as if it was looking in their windows. And even though the woman in the family was ill, she ran outside in her nightgown, bare feet, and the father and the children ran out, and they followed this thing down the street.
A North Bergen school teacher, Ann Karlovich, says she listened skeptically as her daughters described the telltale evidence in the park on the day after the alleged incident.
Back in 1975, we had heard about this incident that there was a flying saucer in the park. So my daughter and her friends went down to the park to see what was going on, and they all came running back saying they saw rings and burn marks in the grass in the field down near the softball field. And they told me the whole story about broken windows, that the Stonehenge had a large glass facade and it was broken by a beam of light that hit it. The kids were awfully excited about it.
Frank Obarski also went to the site with his father. He knew him as a practical man, so it was difficult for him to understand why his dad held to such a seemingly irrational story.
He didn't show much interest in things that couldn't be proved or disproved or that didn't apply to everyday life. And this was one of those categories that he felt didn't apply to everyday life. So I had a lot of trouble reconciling my knowledge of my father with this story he was telling me.
He said, you know, I've lived a long life as honorably and truthfully as I was able to. And he said, a man doesn't do that for over 70 years and then throw it all away by making up some foolishness.
Since the alleged sighting made famous by George Obarski in 1975, residents of North Bergen, New Jersey have reported seeing dozens of UFOs on a number of different occasions. In the early evening of July 6, 1986, Wall Street investor Ron Lee and artist Nanetta Nappi were enjoying the sunset on her terrace in the Stonehenge apartment complex.
I just said, what the heck is that out in the sky? I was just staring out and I saw something that was unidentifiable to me. And Nanetta and I looked at it and it wasn't moving. It didn't have any sound. And we just followed it with our eyes and tried to guess what that could be.
Had it had a motor sound to it, I would not have been suspicious, but the fact that it was so silent and large, it was a large-shaped object, it drew my attention even further. I might have just ignored it. It was oval, and it had three sets of lights underneath it.
And it just kept stationary in the sky for 5-10 minutes, and then at some point, it just took off and went south in a fashion without gaining momentum, but just going straight off with accelerated speed beyond what I was used to seeing. And shortly after that, very shortly, we heard noise and then saw military aircraft following it.
The next day, sightings of this UFO were reported in the press. Nanetta was not one of the people who had called the local officials.
Now, you don't want to talk about things that people could think that you're a little strange thinking about it. I was in denial about it because I didn't want to accept or believe that this thing did not have a rational reason behind it.
2 years later, in the same area of New Jersey, disc jockey Dave D'Elia claims he witnessed an unidentified flying object on St. Patrick's Day in 1988 over North Hudson Park. D'Elia says he was driving home when he noticed something in the sky. He pulled over.
As I'm standing there, it's getting closer and closer. No noise at all. But the lights that made up the triangle were white. The diamond were white and green.
D'Elia returned to his car and followed the UFO down the parkway for several miles, noting the shape of the craft.
The shape of the UFO was a diamond shape like this. Where my thumbs are was basically the part that was coming toward me. That's how it was flying.
In 1993, 5 years after D'Elia's reported 1988 sighting, another North Bergen resident, Ann Karlovich, who had been skeptical of the earlier Obarski sighting, claimed she too was an eyewitness to an unidentified flying object.
I saw this very kind of a elliptical shaped large light shining, and I looked at it and I said, gee, wow, what is that? And it seemed to be moving very slowly, but I wasn't sure. And then as I turned my car around, it was gone. So I came into the house, and my son-in-law and daughter were here. And I said to Joe, my son-in-law, I said, wow, did I see something strange on Boulevard East? And he said, I saw it too.
It had a sort of eerie glow. It looked metallic and was very well lit, like with a fluorescent, bright flood kind of light. As I recall it to be a blimp-like object, like an elongated, like an ellipse, elliptical sphere, if you will.
Joe Bass remembers reading the next day in the local newspaper that all the blimps in the area had been grounded due to foggy weather.
I know what it wasn't. I know that it wasn't some sort of lights on the clouds or a meteor or anything like that. I suspect it was either some kind of government aircraft, some Air Force kind of aircraft that they don't let on that they have aircraft of this type. It wasn't a plane, it wasn't a helicopter, it was like a blimp type object.
It is quite clear that people in this area believe they are seeing UFOs. But are they alien spacecraft? Since World War II, reports of UFO sightings have grown to merit a system of classification, a way to categorize people's claims. This method was developed by an astronomy professor at Northwestern University, J. Allen Hynek. It was he who coined the phrase close encounter of the third kind to describe human contact with an alien. Philip Imbrogno collaborated with Hynek on his final book in 1987. They collected accounts of East Coast sightings, which Imbrogno says number into the thousands.
As I began to investigate more cases, I began to realize that I was just touching the tip of the iceberg. Actually, in a period of 5 years, there were 7,000 sightings. Now, they were made by people who are pillars in the community. Police officers, pilots, lawyers, educators, scientists, executives for major corporations, all saw an object that they considered to be larger than a football field flying overhead.
Psychologist Hubert Dolezal maintains that UFO believers are mistaken in what they think they are seeing.
What we're looking at is a perceptual phenomenon where the background information is either dark conditions or dusk conditions, and where there's very little visual structure against which the object appears. Add to that the question of, does this person have myopia, nearsightedness, and astigmatism, suffers from any other kind of visual defect? And now you're looking at the question of not only unidentified moving objects, but unidentified stationary objects.
I know what I saw. That's the only thing I can say. I know I saw something that didn't look like anything else I had seen before.
Syndicated columnist Sally Deering grew up in the North Bergen area. She's heard dozens of the local UFO stories, and she thinks any belief in aliens and UFOs is ridiculous.
They jump to UFO
And I think they jump to that too quickly. There's a lot of ways you could explain a lot of these things that we see. And I think that people just want to believe, they'll go from A to alien before they'll go to A to B. And I remember back in the early 70s how we would read books, Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land, Kurt Vonnegut's books, and we would accept science fiction as some kind of metaphor for what we were living in at the time. This sort of feeling of being outcast in a society.
Are alienated people confusing science fiction with reality? According to Professor Dolezal, those who claim to see aliens and UFOs may be experiencing a psychological need to be a part of a trend, something bigger than themselves, thus latching on to observations which have little or no supporting evidence.
What I do believe is going on, it's the proverbial bandwagon effect, that it's popular to be included and to be part of this. It is becoming more and more accepted. The onus of you're nuts, or there's something wrong with your brain, or you're a liar has been vastly decreased. I think people are more open to the possibility. I believe every human being wants to be part of something that is special, that is important, that is exciting. Certainly with the advent of human beings becoming more sophisticated in terms of space travel, our own yearnings to be in space and to populate other planets, I think all of that has fueled, and reasonably so, this entire belief system and movement.
Although skeptics like Professor Dolezal give compelling reasons why people think they see things which are not really there, believers remain irritated by the general skepticism they encounter. Franco Barsky is still perplexed by his father's alleged experience.
It really bothered him that people thought he was lying about this. And that's the thing that I find the most compelling about this whole story, and the thing that I have the most trouble with.
I suppose it is frightening because it's the unknown. Things that are not really part of the known are frightening.
It just came and went, and I could be wrong, but I think that was really a once-in-a-lifetime event where I saw something that's unexplained.
Approximately 6,000 years ago, in southern Mesopotamia, a people known as the Sumerians developed an advanced society. As with the ancient Egyptians, many aspects of Sumerian culture remain cloaked in mystery. Zachariah Sitchin is a biblical scholar and expert on ancient civilizations. He believes that extraterrestrials called the Anunnaki visited this planet and influenced the Sumerian culture, a culture which attained heights that have not been matched until modern times.
They had incredible knowledge of the heavens, of astronomy, of mathematics. They had high-rise buildings. They were the first to introduce the wheel. They had art, they had music, they had dance, they had laws, they had courts, they had judges, they had kings. Everything that we consider essential to a high civilization appeared there almost overnight 6,000 years ago.
Sitchin bases his beliefs about the extraterrestrial influence on the Sumerian myths, which were written on ancient tablets. He contends that these myths describe actual experiences with the extraterrestrials known as the Anunnaki. The following text describes an assignment given to the ancient astronauts. Some were told to orbit and guard the Earth, while others were sent down to settle. Assigned to Anu to heed his instructions, 300 in the heavens he stationed as a guard, the ways of Earth to define from the heaven and on Earth. 600 he made reside. After he all their instructions had ordered to the Anunnaki of heaven and of earth, he allotted their assignments.
I surmise from those various texts they were losing their atmosphere on their planet, whether because of natural causes or ecological developments.
According to Sitchin, these texts describe the Anunnaki coming to Earth to acquire gold particles, which they would use to shield their atmosphere. The myths also offer information about law, astronomy, and the cosmos. In these texts, our solar system consists of not 9 planets as we know it, but of 12, with the Anunnaki coming from the 12th planet called Nibiru. this mysterious planet comes close to the Earth's orbit every 3,600 years.
The evidence from those ancient texts, from those ancient depictions, leaves no doubt in my mind that others from another planet were involved not only in our creation by jumping the gun on evolution, the way the Bible states it, but they were involved in giving us civilization for many millennia thereafter.
Did the Sumerians evolve differently from the rest of humanity? Nearly all scholars on Sumerian culture dismiss Sitchin's hypothesis, including Professor Miguel Seville of the University of Chicago.
In my experience, there is nothing in the evolution of the culture in southern Mesopotamia that cannot be explained by the normal evolution of culture in general.
Professor Seville maintains that the Sumerian mythological texts are nothing more or less than what they appear to be, myths. He doubts Sitchin's ability to accurately translate these texts.
The author mixes languages and explains one form of a language by another, and sometimes he seems almost incapable of recognizing whether a word is Sumerian, Akkadian, or Hebrew.
Not only do scholars of cultural anthropology like Professor Seville differ with Sitchin's 12th planet theory, there are astronomers who argue against its very premise.
I don't think that such a planet would be able to elude our detection for any real length of time, given what we are able to do now, as far as telescopic observations and gravitational studies and so forth. As far as traveling here, I personally don't see any reason why our particular star system would be any more interesting than any other.
Of course, new planets are still being discovered, and NASA experts have recently made claims of microfossils on Mars. These findings have led most natural scientists to concede that there is a distinct possibility of life evolving elsewhere in the cosmos.
My guess is that if life forms, it forms on the surface of the planet. You have to have a certain temperate climate. You have to have water on the surface or water just below the surface. It's possible that some of these precursors for life, the organic molecules, get seeded onto primitive Earth, say through comets. We know that comets have a lot of organic chemistry going on them.
Many astronomers and astrophysicists agree with Professor Novick. And yet if there is advanced life elsewhere in the heavens, even in possession of sophisticated technology, the distances involved in navigating the stars are simply too vast.
Maybe there are 10 advanced civilizations in our galaxy, maybe. But if there are, and this is really far-fetched, if there are, they are so far away from us that there is no chance. They are hundreds of thousands of light years away. There is no chance, zero, that we will ever be visited.
The best way to describe the distance to the stars, the distances are actually quite vast. The distance from here to the galactic center, we're just talking roughly 30,000 or so light years, I believe.
There are those that maintain that the current surge in extraterrestrial sightings is best explained as a substitute for traditional religion.
If you take an adherence to a divine being, a god, what a religious belief one may want to adhere to, in the absence of such a religious belief, I think there, or as a supplement perhaps, there may be a need to say there is something more sophisticated, wiser, more technologically advanced. And it seems to me that this is a reasonable supplement to say as a substitute for religious beliefs per se.
Our needs are so great emotionally for some kind of religious center, and our fears, our paranoid fears are so great that it's extremely difficult to look at this objectively, and yet that's what we must do.
Every era has had its extraterrestrials, except we now have a language that allows them to be extraterrestrial beings, instead of previous eras when they were just strange beings.
If all the skeptical scientists in the world would put their heads together just for 1 year and do an in-depth study of this phenomena
to find out whether or not UFOs are extraterrestrial in nature, maybe we could come up with some answers instead of being criticized all the time as to whether or not this is a true science.
Somehow we as scientists have failed in explaining to people that there are things about the universe that we really do understand. We don't know everything, but we know a lot. And there are things that we can just rule out. And people just don't buy this. And I find that very sad, that the culture of modern science has not really sunk in the culture of our nation.
Bud Hopkins believes that if modern science would not completely rule out UFO claims, if they would just investigate a fraction of these sightings, they would indeed reach a larger audience.
What I like to say is that an extraordinary phenomenon, which this undeniably is, no matter what your point of view is about it, an extraordinary phenomenon demands an extraordinary investigation.
The way science works is that if there were something out there that was credible, if there was real good evidence and things could be followed up and said, yes, in fact, I see what you're talking about, people would love that. If there was anything to it, it would be embraced by the scientific community.
Though skeptics will insist that all the thousands of claims of alien sightings do not add up to a single scientific confirmation, people will go on reporting them, asserting with equal fervor that what they saw was real. But without physical evidence, we are left only with assumptions. Some choose to believe in the existence of extraterrestrial life, rather than tolerate the uncertainty of the unexplained.